Our next panel is Families in Real Estate, Challenges and Opportunities Ahead. It's going to be moderated by Jonathan Crystal of Crystal & Company. He'll introduce the rest of the panel just a little briefly about Jonathan. Besides being a great friend of the Gulf Coast Regional Family Forum, Jonathan is a third-generation principal with the family firm of Crystal & Company, where he serves currently as the CFO and is responsible for the firm's operations and working with his father and his two brothers in the business. Crystal & Company is a national insurance brokerage firm comprised of 450 professionals working across 11 offices throughout the U.S. And there's a cutoff there. My apologies. That's embarrassing. Including Houston. And Jonathan's previously led the firm's National Private Client Service Group. In addition to Crystal's working advising families and family enterprises, a major component of their business model consists of advising private equity firms on various matters of risk and insurance. So with that, Jonathan Crystal. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Del. I would have gotten on stage sooner, but he jumped the mic. Scott Clemens, did anybody catch that he was a classics major in college? His Princeton education suited him pretty well. That was pretty impressive coverage of macroeconomics, investors. We'll try to keep it there. First of all, I just want to thank the panelists today, so Brian and Margaret and Phil for joining today. This will probably be a little bit different style and format than the last discussion. We're going to keep it pretty open-ended. All of us have family enterprises informing what we do and have backgrounds. I'm the odd man out in that I'm not in the real estate industry. My family's been in the insurance brokerage business for 85 years now, and I've worked alongside my two brothers and my dad for almost 20 years. So, we say if we made it this long without, firing one another, killing one another, punching each other out, that's a pretty good sign of a cohesive family dynamic. But it's my work in my family business and working alongside my family has very much informed how I think about business in general and thinking about the future and the growth and expansion of our business. And I think it's really very generous of Brian and Margaret and Phil to share their own experiences and their own insights along the way. So just to kick things off, I'm going to ask each of them to kind of share a little bit about their story and kind of how they got to where they are today. So I'll start with Brian since you're next to me here.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Dinerstein. I live here in Houston, Texas. I guess let's talk about how I got here. I was one of those guys. Always wanted to work with my dad, my granddad, and just have always considered myself very fortunate for doing that. We build apartments and student apartments all over the country. Our big markets are Houston, Austin, Denver, Southern California, and then we do a lot of student stuff all over the place. I always enjoy talking to my friends and peers, talking to their kids to learn about what they look for in student housing. And I've been to about probably 60, 70 schools all over the country working on it. I've done this about 18 years. I did it as a kid growing up, and it's a fascinating topic. I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm sort of a freak show, if you will. I always meet people for breakfast and lunch and talk to different folks about it. And there's a lot of things I could say. I guess the main thing I'd say is it's pretty simple. At the end of the day, you need to really love the work. You need to really get along well with your father or your mother. Otherwise, it's like having sort of a mediocre marriage and saying, hey, let's have a kid, maybe that'll fix things. Because it won't. So, but I've got plenty of thoughts and comments, but I'd like to turn it over to Margaret.
Hi, everyone. I'm Margaret Streicker. I'm from New York. I grew up in a family business, but I am not part of the family business. And my father started a fairly large, successful pension fund investment company, and I started my own company at 26, which is actually not the first company I started. The first company I started is arguably selling fish to the fish store when I was 8 years old with my brother, or selling diamonds, which was really a broken car glass window when I was about 7 with my best friend, or the stationery business that we had going when I was about 8 years old that we went door to door because I wasn't allowed to be in the Girl Scouts because my mom didn't really feel like bringing me to the Girl Scout meetings. So we made stationery, and then we would go door to door, kind of trailing the Girl Scouts trying to sell our stationery. So I've had a fairly long career as an entrepreneur. I started Newcastle in 2004 after having started one just prior to that called West Village Corner Realty, and I realized that there was a challenge in that name when what happens if I wanted to buy something mid-block? So I was never again going to call myself West Village Corner Realty because, stuck in West Village, stuck on the corner, where was I going to go from there? So I founded Newcastle. And I would love to say the rest has been smooth sailing, but of course that's not true. My specialty is in asset repositioning. Historically, that's been in New York City doing multifamily apartment buildings, ground floor retail, occasional commercial spaces. I have also recently launched a student housing fund, and I think there's a commonality there with student housing, called Plato Student Platform. And we are now in Indiana, North Carolina, New Haven by Yale, and I'm about to go to contract on something in Lafayette, Louisiana this week, and this is all in the past 8 months. So.
Great. I'm Philip Morgan, works as Senior Vice President in the development side at Morgan Group. Not in student housing currently, but maybe we will be soon. It sounds like a good business. I grew up in Houston, went away for college at Penn in Philadelphia, lived in New York for a couple years, and always grew up around the business, not really knowing, if there'd be an interest there, but always enjoyed the discussions growing up. And, my first job was on a construction side, and just every casual discussion, or not everyone, but a lot of them just in family discussions ended up, just talking about work and real estate. And so I always had that interest and passion for it. And officially joined Morgan Group in 2011. So been there about 7 years now. And just primarily been working on the development side, was working as a city development partner in Houston until last August, and just relocated out to the West Coast. So we used to have an office in San Diego, and now we're trying to get active again and replant a flag on the West Coast. So I've really enjoyed it, and it's definitely an interesting dynamic, working with the family, but it's a lot of fun.
Great. It's a good start. As I get further along in my career, I start to really appreciate the value of experience more than I did when I was right out of college. And one of the things I think we kind of all share in common is the benefit of kind of our family's collective experience and history. And so, growing up in San Antonio, I recall in the early 80s, families who were in real estate, a lot of them got seriously hurt during that period. And so I just wanted to see if you could share some of the lessons you've learned in the course of your careers, but really from the benefit of your own family's experience, and kind of how that's contributed to kind of how you look at the world today and your own careers and in your own practice. So do a jump ball here if anybody wants to kick things off. Yeah,
I'm happy to go. Obviously my experience is limited just to what I've been doing, in my career, but certainly I've heard plenty of stories from my father and my grandfather and the partners that my dad has, and so it's just certainly informs the way we think, and helpful to have all that experience as part of our company. I remember 3 years ago seeing all these cranes, and you go to these conferences and you just hear it's a great market, all this job growth, and I'd go home and be all excited from these conferences, and I just hear from my dad, I've seen this before. I'll tell you exactly how it's going to play out. And so I think it's just really leads to healthy discussion to kind of have that kind of fact check, saying, I've seen this before, and this is how it played out last time. And obviously not every cycle is similar, but they're the same, but there's similarities to it. So.
I think a healthy dose of pessimism really goes a long way. Being a conservative underwriter, always under-promising and over-delivering. I mean, if hypothetically speaking, I told someone we're coming in at 14% IRR and instead we deliver a 12, everyone's like, well, what'd you do wrong? If I tell everyone we're going to deliver a 12 and I come in at a 16, I'm the best thing since sliced bread. So I always like to set realistic expectations, which I know I can achieve, and then do that. I'm fortunate. I've been doing this for a number of years now. Every day I keep getting older. And I've really only had one bad deal. And, you can always say, well, 20/20 hindsight, this is what went wrong, that's what went wrong. But it's choosing partners that you can work with, choosing people that if something goes wrong, and there's always something that can go wrong in a real estate deal, maybe 100 balls in the air. If you've got 99 up in the air, you're doing a great job. And if one of them slips, you want to have people around you that understand that you've still got the other 99 in the air. And just being able to kind of go the distance is really meaningful.
So it's a great question, and what I'd say is how we try to think about things is, you want to be aggressive, but I always say I can't do my last deal, and by that meaning I can't do the deal that you just swing and miss, and you're kind of out of luck. Because look, going back to sort of the family dynamic, everybody in this audience has got stress, and if they need their stuff to work and do well and perform. And if it doesn't perform, it's very problematic. If you're at a family type deal and it doesn't perform, it's, you've got all kinds of family challenges. They got to deal with at Thanksgiving and on the weekends, and it's just like I said earlier, it's a heavy process. But in terms of risk, you want to be as diversified as you can. And diversified can mean different things. It can mean different blocks in New York City. It can be different states like it is to Philip. It can be different food groups. The fundamentals that all of y'all are doing in your investing environment are not dissimilar. Now, you also have to be honest, and I think that's one of the challenges with being a developer. The developers can convince people of anything, including themselves. So you have to be honest with yourself and with your team, and that a lot of things are more correlated than anyone realized. You talk about wanting to live and learn. I learned more in 2008 than I ever wished on anybody. And turns out, you can be as diversified as you think, but at the end of the day, a lot of things, when the tide comes in, a lot of things move in the same direction. So you do the best you can. You want to have as much information as you can. You want to, I always tell my kids, losers repeat mistakes, which my wife says is too harsh, but that's how I feel. So you try to have as much information as you can, make a decision, and then don't look back and don't repeat the sins of the past. But I guess that going back to how to manage risk, you always want to make sure that the deals that you do in whatever line of work that you're in, that there is a back door, and that you're not just swinging for the fences, and if it doesn't work, it's sort of game over. That's not an intelligent way to invest, and that may mean, specific to real estate, that you're not going to use a certain amount of leverage, or you're not going to be in the land business, or you're not going to go to a new property type, or whatever the case. Everybody, each to their own, and how they think about it and do it. But to me, that's the most important thing, is to manage. Everybody knows how to count up profits. That's super easy. But to manage your downside, and whether that's with a good capital structure, or good partners, or whatever the case may be, that's the question you always ought to be constantly asking yourself and sensitizing in your analysis.
I think that's, to that point, I think I've learned a lot from my father's mistakes and my grandfather's mistakes along the way, and maybe having the benefit of saying, okay, I can avoid at least one of those, and I'll make my own mistakes, has probably been pretty helpful along the way. Let's talk about family a bit and relationships. A couple of us work alongside family, and I joined my business. I was 25. I was the third of three sons coming into the business. My brothers are 6 and 8 years older than me, and now that I'm 42, that's a lot. That age difference seems a lot less, but it seemed quite a bit of a big deal when I joined, and it's been a learning process to work alongside them and to work alongside my father and develop that respect that comes from working alongside and seeing how they work. And I've been very fortunate that my brothers and my father and I are very complementary in the way we look at the world and the way we do things, and so we've been able to kind of keep pretty clear swim lanes. But to the extent that Philip and Brian in particular, since you do work alongside family, maybe some experiences that you want to share, and kind of what's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, look, I'm so lucky. I'm just so fortunate, and I try to remember that every single day. But look, I think the flaw is, I was going to have family with my group either way. Now, I'm really lucky that my group is really strong. I think back, if the mess would have been if forget about the rest of my group, if I'd have just been couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time, if you will, I think that would have been a mess, because I was going to go work there. It was always what I wanted. It was always what my dad wanted, my granddad wanted. So I think the biggest flaw is, if you've got a bunch of family members and they're not capable, that's a real mess. I don't think we were set up correctly in that because we all were coming in, but I'm so lucky and fortunate that I think I'm bringing in the rear on my group. I mean, my group's just terrific, every one of them. So I'm really fortunate there. So and I don't, at this point, I've done this stuff so long, it's always good to kind of think this stuff through. And we had our call, and I kind of looked at our org chart and thought it through. And we've got 5 family members and then 5 executives that are not family. And I know how I brought each of them in. Every one of them, as they should, were concerned and skeptical. And, I bringing in a partner, an executive, I said, look, if this isn't a concern or thought of yours, then, I don't want you. I mean, you should have it. You should have some thoughts and questions. And I kind of say the same thing. I've got a really great group. Get comfortable with them, but also talk to the other non-family members and see how they've been treated and whatnot. And if it's done correctly, I think it can be done really well because it's more long-term. I'm proud of a lot of things, and hopefully all great companies think this way, and hopefully we're working our way towards being that. But I always say the same thing to every person that we hire, from executives to the folks that answer the phone. I'm most proud of these 3 things in this order. Number 1, we've never had a problem with anyone, no partner, no lender. Number 2, we've never laid anybody off in any market, which, and I always say I don't have the guts to lay anybody off, and wouldn't. And then number 3, that we've been fortunate to make a good living. And, I think that's neat. And, I think a lot of companies think that way, but a lot of them don't have the ability to. So I think when done correctly, I think it's sort of the best of all worlds. Now, I am biased, so take that for what you want. Like I said earlier, I always got to be careful talking to the developer, but but I am biased. But I think when done correctly, I think it's the best of all worlds in terms of a long-term, paternalistic type view, still with a focus on making making profitable, efficient deals. But again, if you don't have talented folks, don't ever. I always tell people when I meet with them, don't ever kid yourself that you're the family that can survive that, because you can't. I mean, that's a naive thing to think that, hey, we get along so well that won't make any difference. I could go on and on, but I'd rather hear your thoughts.
So I have an interesting situation. I founded my own company and whatnot, but my brother's actually one of my clients. And we're a year apart, and we went to school together and all that good stuff, and we're great, but it's not that we're sitting side by side inside the same office. It's that I, in fact, then have to think of him as a client. And then he thinks of me as a service provider sometimes. So certainly that adds it. We try and keep that outside of, Saturday and Sunday conversations. But in family businesses, much like every family, every family's different. Everyone kind of works together and has memories of what happened when you were 12 years old or 14 years old, or that time that, one covered for the other when somebody was sneaking out of the house. And I'm not saying that happened in my case. I'm just saying, I'm just saying that you're going to, when you're working with people, and some of my employees who are now my partners, I've been working with for 12 years, and which is not to say that I'm only 13 years old, but that's a really long time. And so your employees can become your partners, can become your family too. And so working with people who you were literally born alongside, and then working with people who become your family, brings a whole set of challenges. And remembering that you still want to wake up and walk back into that same office the next morning really means that you should kind of temper your personality and remember what the right thing is to do. I also feel that I've never laid off anyone, even in the 2010 downturn. Now, we have grown and we have shrunk, but we do that naturally. We won't rehire if somebody leaves, but that job is theirs until they choose to leave it sometimes. And just trying to do the right thing and remember that life is long, I think gets pretty far.
Yeah, I think for us, we're, unique to some of our peers because we're just really now getting into it. When my father and uncle were partners, they basically grew the business from when my grandfather had it. He was more of an investment builder, and the industry was much different. And so, it's now just within our family, but I'm the first one into the business. So we're spending a lot of time talking to our peers in the business, outside the business, that have family businesses, and trying to figure out what works, what doesn't, and setting it up so that we kind of separate church and state a little bit and view the business, not trying to bring in all the complications that tend to come with family businesses, and also not try to have the pressures that if you're within the family and don't want to work there, that's fine too. And there's a lot of senior partners at the firm, and I'm not being treated any differently than they are. And so for us, the important thing is we want to respect the business and try to make sure that we're kind of avoiding some pitfalls and basically any lessons we can learn from other families. And I think there's no right way. It could work differently for us as it does for somebody else, and it could work fine in both cases. So we're still very much kind of working through what works best for us, but trying to have the mindset of it's a small company and not necessarily solely a family enterprise.
Sure. Margaret, you've made choices to chart your own course, and would you mind sharing a little bit more about how you made those decisions and kind of?
Sure. So my undergraduate's in architecture, and then after architecture school at Princeton, I went to Columbia, and I was getting my master's degree in architecture, go figure. I realized there was a real estate program there, and so I decided to get a second master's simultaneously. While I was doing all of that, I started yet another company. I do that a lot. And we were doing the conversion of an industrial building in New York City to half industrial, half commercial, which was part of the zoning code at the time. After that, went to work at Tishman Speyer, and I was in this very wonderful program called the MBA Associate Rotation Program, some version thereof, 2 years middle management, spread it all around, and then I bought my first building while I was there, and I was kind of doing that nights and weekends while I was working at Tishman. Post 9/11, the program got dismantled. It was a rough time in New York, which many people don't remember. New York was going through a recession kind of before 9/11 hit. And it was a bad time to be a New Yorker from New York. I'll just leave it at that. And when they dismantled the program, I had just bought these buildings in the West Village corner Realty. And I kind of said, well, okay, I'm going to try this out. My dad, frankly, told me you're crazy. He said, if you want to go out on your own, do that when you're 40. You'll have built up the contacts, you'll have built up your network, you'll have built up your kind of career pedigree and all of that. What are you doing? And I said, well, let's just see how this goes. That was the last time I ever had a job. It's been a few years, and somehow I've made it work. I can't prescribe out how everybody else should do it exactly the same way, because I've been lucky, I've been fortunate, I definitely work hard. But sometimes you just do what you got to do.
Now, I'm one of 3 sons. We don't have sisters. Is there anything you could share with us, your experiences being, from your gender and in terms of being a daughter and kind of a family environment?
I think I'm probably from the last generation of women where nothing was expected of them, which is not to say there were no expectations or that you couldn't thrive or do well or be accomplished, but there was no obligation to do anything. So I would start doing things, and both of my parents would say, do you really want to do this? I'm like, sure, why not? And I don't think I was aware, I guess, of how hard some of the steps were that I was taking. But similarly, there was never an expectation that I would go into the family business. In fact, it was kind of, we'll almost say, discouraged, where my brother would have internships, and it was clearly assumed that he was going to step into the role. Those internships weren't there for me. If I really, really, really begged, probably I could have gotten one, but it wasn't there. It wasn't assumed, and so no, I'm not part of the family business, and that's fine. It's all worked out well, but it's definitely been a different experience, I think, than if I were the son. I'm also the oldest.
we were kind of comparing notes before we did this session about, like, I've been at my firm for 18 years. I've never gotten a performance review. So, there's something that can be said when you work in a family environment about, or if you're an entrepreneur, about getting feedback. Could you guys share some experience on what you've done to kind of invest in yourself, grow professionally, what resources you avail yourself from in terms of feedback and growth, and just continuing to develop in your own capacity?
Yeah, I'm laughing. I don't feel like feedback's ever been the problem. I wish I got much less feedback. Incredible.
Point in time feedback is not.
Yeah,
not
no,
the
I
same
love
that,
that
yeah,
idea.
yeah.
One thing is we're just talking and I'm thinking, and by the way, one thing, Philip's granddad is one of the all-time coolest guys you'll ever see or meet. By the way, just true original and just a really, really neat guy. As you mentioned, I just start smiling thinking about him. But anyways, look, we talked about this a little bit on the call. I feel like I've been very fortunate. I guess I've done this. 18 years in this, as a kid growing up and whatnot. And I always felt like I was at the front of the line. And I think I got to, pick up a few years in my process, if you will, by asking questions, getting, getting more visibility, more access. So I've always felt sort of fortunate there. I mean, the challenge is kind of growing, going to the next level. But look, that's no different than at a non-family company. I mean, that's the thing. A lot of these things, every entrepreneur goes through either way. And look, if you're lucky enough to find work that you can get excited and passionate about, whether it's a family deal, an entrepreneurial deal, or working for a wonderful company. I mean, there's not a doubt in my mind that most of the folks at Google or Amazon, I mean, they've got this incredible passion and taking it personal. We're doing a deal in LA across from SpaceX. I mean, you talk about a cult environment. My goodness. This Elon Musk, people would lie in front of a railroad for him. I mean, he's. So I think if you can get that, I think you've got a chance to really excel. And I just think it's a more fun way to live and be, and ultimately a more fun way to work. But in terms of sort of growth and evolution and feedback, I mean, that's a tough one, but I don't think it's any more or less difficult at a family company than anywhere else. But look, if you can get a network and like groups like this, and a lot of life is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I always say, I like to learn from people's wisdom, and Philip, you touched on that. I think you put it a little better than I did, but that's how I try to think about it. I like to, learn from people's wisdom and their experiences. And we're not in the rocket business. We're not in we're not splitting cells, and we're not doing things that have never been done before. So I just as soon try to find mentors and peers and learn from them, and try not to repeat the mistakes. I've been really fortunate. We've had some great partners in not so much New York, but more Chicago that I've learned a lot from over the years, and we've grown up together in the space, and that's been really, really terrific. And that's could not be more opposite than what we do in terms of large institutional infrastructure and whatnot, but great core values, and I've learned a lot from them, and hopefully they've learned some from us as well. So, the other thing I always tell our people, the guy that says, or the lady that says they have all the answers, that's the one to bet against. Just figure out how you can short them and bet against them. So it's a constant, permanent process. It was fun when I used to tell my kids that, and I got to explain what shorting it was to my kid. So that was, fellas, always good to be teaching them as well. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they're intuitive gamblers, it looks like, but they come from good stock there. But
right, contrarian investors. That's like my youngest.
Yep.
Yeah. I was just gonna say. I mean, a lot of what Brian touched on. It's, for me, it's been really helpful having mentors. My prior life before joining the family business, and I think, being in a family business, I feel like I get very candid feedback from my father, and we have a lot of discussions where, like, halfway through it, he'll be like, it's oftentimes him telling me from something he saw that's discouraging me, and then halfway through it, he'll say, you know what, I remember the same conversation I had with my father when he would tell me from his experience, and when I was young and your age, and aggressive and ambitious and all this stuff, and then he'd be telling me all the pitfalls, lessons he learned. So it's a lot of trying not to make those mistakes, and then it's been very helpful for me too, just to have peer networking groups that are, you realize in those sessions that it doesn't even have to be the same industry. You're going through all the same stuff. And so it's just helpful, I think, to just get many different perspectives, to help you make informed decisions. And I think a lot of it too, especially it's probably in most industries, but especially this one, is there's so many people that have gone through the exact same experiences and, all the way down to a granular level. We're going to be building in a new market, and you just call up one of your peers. And one of the advantages is, being in a generational business is high up. We've got relationships with all these other national firms, and it's so easy to pick up the phone and talk to my peer. And, Phoenix is a new market we just entered in, and say, you just compare notes. Am I using the right consultants or whatever it is? You just get really good, honest feedback, and there's plenty of mistakes to still be made, but hopefully helps you avoid some.
In terms of the ongoing education aspect of your question, I had heard a statistic that kind of the age of replacing oneself had shrunk from once every 20 years, or roughly once a generation, down to once every 5, which means that every year you are 20% less relevant than you were the year prior at this point.
Well, that's depressing.
It is, but the good news is that through awareness and kind of self-education and peer networking and, I'm not a TED Talk person, but like hypothetically watching TED Talks, which I advise I can take for myself right now, you can do that. So Jonathan and I actually spent a week up at Harvard in a YPO program this January. This is now my 3rd year. I think he did it 3 years as well. That's been enormously helpful, just having a week of intense work, but a week outside of what you see every day. Putting yourself in situations that you're not accustomed to is the quickest way to learn and realize what's relevant, what's not relevant, and the take-home lessons from things like that are fantastic. In my own company, I run something called Newcastle University, which is Friday mornings every summer, and we bring in speakers or people within the firm, like our general counsel will give a little lecture on kind of legal practices and things like that. And certain people are required to attend if it's directly applicable, but everyone in the company is welcome to attend. So making sure there's always this notion of continuing education and kind of betterment of yourself and your staff, I think, is tremendously important. So that's.
I think the phrase like shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations that people keep reminding me as a 3rd generation member of my family, sort of is a drive to continue to improve and to continue to grow and expand. And I, when I do encounter people who are in family businesses, and I do sometimes, who are sitting on their laurels or are counting the dollars and cents that their parents and their grandparents had generated before them, I find it to some extent offensive, because I think it's really incumbent on each of us in the next generation to kind of take it to that next level. And one of my mentors once said to me, you're stand on the shoulders of giants. And I think that's something that, really resonates with me in thinking about what the expectation is as a next generation member in my family. But I think because we do sort of stand on those shoulders and have that perspective, it does give us kind of a lens to look out there. And I think each of the 3 of you are innovators and are thinking creatively about your own business and kind of new directions where you can take it. And I'd just like to explore that for a second and kind of encourage, ask each of you to kind of comment on where the paths that you've taken it, where are the things that maybe your parents maybe were skeptical or wouldn't have thought about it, and you're going kind of hard to the right in a way that is distinctive. So, maybe Brian.
I mean, it's a good question. Once again, we're a team. We make team decisions. I'd say it's been growth in personnel and talent. I mean, I was always sort of a tough one for my dad. My dad is a incredibly hard worker and a sort of he's a developer's developer, so the idea of sort of betting on others took him a little longer. The stuff, to get to the next level and grow with new partners, probably took a little bit of time, but it was really more internal. I mean, honestly, he was terrific on that side. He was very sort of innovative and open to new markets, new products, in a lot of ways more so than I am, which is sort of interesting. But I would say to kind of invest in people and spend what it takes to get great people. we've got I feel like we have a different party, I think, every other week, and sometimes weeks we have two and lunches, and I can just see it just making them cringe. That would be one.
But sustainability, you guys have done a lot of work on.
We're very green. We're proud of that. And you talk about learning. That's something that I learned from. I feel like I learned that from my kids. I remember years ago going to see. It just sort of hit me going to see this silly Muppets movie, and the villain was his name was like Tex Oilman or something, and he was like dumping oil, and all the kids are screaming and all this stuff. And I remember going back and saying, this environmental thing, I mean, it has legs. This is a real deal. And then it turned out there was a lot of capital out there sort of pursuing that. It was on the office side at the time, and the office guys are usually ahead of the apartment guys in some ways. So we kind of made a big pivot since January of 11. Every deal we've done has been at, it's called LEED Silver or Gold or Platinum, but environmentally green deal and stamped green, and it's been neat. We've not gotten an incredible lift in terms of our, y'all call it earnings, but our NOI or FFO, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's helped our brand internally. It's helped recruit. I think it helps when we sell. We sell a lot to pension fund advisors, and there's been a few that have had a certain allocation where they needed to go green. That they needed a certain amount of green product. It's helped a little bit as a borrower, and more important to us when the buyers borrow, because we're in a leveraged business and every inch really moves the needle. So I think it's helped our brand. And I remember when I kind of pitched to the group, I said, no one's really against the environment. And the group kind of got quiet. So I said, well, maybe, turns out some of my group might have been at the time. But we've come a long way, and that's an important thing. I was going to add one other thing. We're talking about kind of wisdom and sort of lessons learned. It's important to respect what's happened in the past. And I do think back to the biggest mistake that I made in my career was fourth quarter of 08. And I looked at our deals. None of them were doing great, obviously, but our debt service had gone to literally zero. They all were cash flowing. We didn't have any loans due for a period of years. We had big partners. And I really felt like it was the time to put our foot on the gas and go. And we didn't. We were more active than most, but I should have been more active than I was. And the reason I wasn't was whoever I thought was the smartest guy or smartest lady that I knew, specifically whoever I thought was the oldest person that was smart that I knew, whoever I sat down with, I couldn't leave just feeling just physically ill. I mean, I couldn't find one person that had a different opinion. So kind of sat back, talked to my dad, said, you know what, I'm probably missing something. I'm being naive and arrogant and young, and shame on me, and let's just do what we have to and move on. And looking back, I think I had the right analysis. I just didn't have the conviction. And look, I didn't know the world would, right its ship as quick as it did, but I did see opportunity out there. And for what Philip and I do, everything is cost driven, and we saw costs fall off the table. We saw supply fall off the table, and again, we're not in the retail business. We weren't worried that demand was going to disappear. People still have to live somewhere. So looking back, that was a mistake, and that's completely on me. So as we're all saying, especially me and all of y'all, how important it is to listen and learn. You also have to be able to chart your own path and think differently. And if not, all you're going to do is perform or underperform the market regardless of what it is. And if that's all that the three of us can do, and it's not, then honestly, y'all are better off buying the S&P index, so you can have the liquidity and ride it up or down. So I think that probably applies to any kind of investor and any kind of work. But I do think back, that was a mistake that was completely on me. But that's just where I was at that time. If it happened again, I would still get as many opinions as I could and try to make as much analysis as I could. But I think I'd have more conviction to make my own decisions. Didn't answer your question, so sorry about that.
I think you did a good job.
I was going to say, the best and worst deals are always the ones that you didn't do. Which is to say, the best and worst deals are always the ones which you didn't do. Meaning I can look back and say, oh, that building got away. Or, oh, I really wish I did that deal. Or, oh my God, I'm so glad I dodged that one, right? Like, none of it's real, right? And that brings me back to profits also, not real. Until that building's sold, or until that widget's sold, or until that piece of paper that is your bond is sold, none of it's real. It's all intangible. So for me, I really try not to spend too much time looking back on opportunities missed, because frankly, I can rewrite history however I want to make it look really good or really bad. It's only the ones that are sitting on the table right in front of you that you have yet to do that are where I want to spend my time and my thought and my analysis. Obviously, everyone's going to kind of dip back into the past every once in a while.
How did you find your way to Plato, your new venture?
Okay. So New York is a somewhat political place at times. And under Bloomberg, Newcastle was really the golden child of how to do rent regulation and asset repositioning right. We have rent regulation and rent control in New York City. It's a highly political topic. I happen to be an expert in it and have made case law a few times in it. But under our current mayor, it's becoming more and more politicized, and more or less they're trying to criminalize being a landlord. Now, there are, in fact, bad people who do it, but just by waking up in the morning doesn't make you a bad person because you happen to be a landlord in New York. And so I started selling a lot of the deals that I was in with partners and things like that in New York City and going national. So we bought something in Phoenix, we bought some things in Florida, Arkansas, in New Haven, and was looking around, and then spent all of 2017 just kind of looking at deals. And we got really close on a few in Philly. We got really close on something at Yale, and we got really, really close on a few deals. And then by the end of 2017, I said, okay, 2016. All of that was just 2016. I said, okay, what are we doing? And I realized that student housing had so many of the same parallels as what I'd been doing in New York with asset repositioning, where there my kind of ideal incoming tenant would be maybe second job out of college, dial back the age a few years, layer on a couple furniture packages, and we have asset repositioning for student housing. So since then, it's been wheels up, registered with the SEC, founded my first fund, and that's what we've been doing, and it's been great. Honestly, it's been fantastic. And pulling together a lot of the things that you just can't do in New York, branding and website deployment and using technologies in the way they're meant to be used, has been really a wonderful experience.
You have great stories. I mean, with the stuff that happens, you just can't make up. I mean, you tell the stories, and they have to be true. No one can make up how.
They think you're a pathological liar.
Yeah. It's the student stuff is it's a trip.
Yeah, I'd say for us, we had at the end of last cycle, had kind of shrunk back to Houston. My dad had thought this was the 80s all over again. It's going to be a big bust. Let's kind of just sit back and we took time really to kind of study the entire company history and all the projects we built, and basically tried to make kind of a lessons learned. If we could do this over again, what would we change? And what we kept coming back to is you can do everything right, but it's really tough in the development business. The market you build into is going to be different than the market you open into. And if you do everything right, but you're a seller at the wrong time because that was your capital strategy, you can get hurt. And so, half of the business we've done in the last 6 years, we've actually kind of built to core for ourselves and other like-minded partners, where we've said, we want to go long on good quality real estate. And in hindsight, we wish we'd kept everything we'd ever built. And that's how my grandfather did it, and a lot of his peers did it. And he still comes to work every day and checks his financials, and he's got mailbox money, and values have gone up. And so that's really informed. I'd say we're still doing the same business. It's still multifamily development, and now we're getting into acquisitions. But it's how can we think long-term,
going to California and some.
It's looking at this more of unlike a public company that's got quarterly earnings. We're in this for the long haul. We have the advantage of time being on our side, and if the market's telling us to do a lot in a few years, let's do a lot. If the market's telling us to do nothing, let's do nothing. But over time, if you can get through the cycles, we've seen values have only gone up and up and up. Of course, interest rates have only gone down, and cap rates have gone down too. But yeah, I would say it's definitely informed kind of our capital strategy.
So we got some great questions here. I'll answer the first one. I think I know who asked this. Yes, I do wear these boots in Manhattan, okay? Not every day, but certainly out and about, and to the office occasionally. Brian, you mentioned that you've got 5 family executives, you've got 5 non-family executives. How do you give the non-family executives, it says equity participation in your business, but alignment? I think the broader question is, how do you align the incentives?
I mean, look, that it's such a great question, and you know, it's like the old adage, show me how people are paid and I'll show you how a company works. And look, nobody should go to work to get paid, but as I say daily, I love work, but I sure as heck won't go for free, and I wouldn't expect anyone else to. Timothy? So it's super important. Look, if you ever want to scale your business to any size whatsoever in any line of work, it's all about structure, and part of structure is compensation. I study it basically full time. For whatever reason, apartment developers, and it kind of goes back to Trammell Crow and some of those folks, and Ron Twilliger and all these guys. I mean, they've just made a literal science out of it. So it can be done. It depends on what your model is. What Philip talked about on holding stuff for the long term, which certainly makes a heck of a lot of sense. It is harder to compensate your people and to get compensated. Going back to what I said earlier, I love work. I don't go for free. I'd love to keep stuff forever, but I can't figure out how to structure a promote that's good enough for me, let alone for my team. So, but look, there's pluses in going in and out of things over 3 or 5 years. I do think there's too much friction, and I do think you can do better by holding stuff for a longer term. But in terms of raising capital, in terms of going in and out of cycles, I think on some levels there's less risk. I do think there's less upside, and agree with you on that. But it's a challenge. You have to align people, and you've got to have the right folks. I mean, if you don't have the right people, one of the things that we do that's not the market that I do is we're happy to pay well and give plenty of upside and all that. But with us, you've got to be present to win. If you leave, and I know everyone and all my peers are into vesting, and that's a thing, and I get it. But I'm not going to spend all my time starting a business, years of blood and sweat, and then have somebody kind of be able to take his, go and do the same thing next door with his carried interest in our deals. So you just have to align the folks, make sure that they're paid the right way. But I do think that's secondary. I think first is getting the right people. And if anyone here is the solution on how to not hire the right person and hire the right person, let me know, because that's a very tough thing. I always, you can only learn so much in an interview. I always think about myself. I think if someone gave me 30 minutes, I could get any job in the world. And you give me an hour, and I probably couldn't get any job in the world. I probably couldn't get any job. So, there's only so much you can get out of an interview. You've got to get, I think in a perfect world, you work with people that you've worked with on their experiences, and you bring them internal. I think that's a better way to get somebody that's not selling, that you can really see what you're getting. But obviously you start with character and integrity, but to me that almost goes without saying. But you got to get the right folks and then structure it. But it's a constant, talk about what I said earlier, it's a constant work in progress. And if I or anybody says they know exactly how to pay and align, then they don't know.
Yeah. And Margaret, you've built your own partners as well. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I am a slow turtle. It takes me a long time watching how they operate, watching what their knee-jerk reaction is before I start offering them equity, which doesn't mean I don't do it. I think it's really important to do, but I am a very slow turtle.
Now, this is a little bit more direct to the business that y'all are in. The question is, what is your outlook for real estate returns over the next 5 years within your particular sections of activity? And so I'll start with Phil since...
I think I don't know, that's a tough question. I think it depends on the geography you're in. I mean, I think Houston we're starting to see fundamentals improve in Houston. So whereas 2 years ago we didn't like Houston as much, we're more bullish on Houston today. Although we're starting to see, again, cranes cranes coming in the air, and so we'll see kind of how long we have muted supply for. A lot of focus on the multifamily side this cycle, or at least for the first part of this cycle, we'll see how long it goes, has been on urban infill. And so you've seen overbuilding in core markets, downtowns, kind of all across the country. And so you're seeing a lot of, equity shifting their focus now to kind of suburbia in, secondary markets that have been overlooked. So, everybody's kind of chasing where there hasn't been as much supply. And then also where kind of the job growth still looks optimistic. So we're bullish still on, Southern California. Everything's expensive there, but fundamentals still look strong. It's, for all the reasons it's tough to build there, fundamentals are still very strong there. Phoenix seeing job growth and recovered later this cycle. So we're looking at markets that have kind of recovered late. And then, but yeah, I'd say we're not as aggressive as we were 4 or 5 years ago. It's scarier times right now looking for development opportunities.
My specialty is slightly different than these two gentlemen. So I do asset repositioning, meaning in, for instance, student housing, I'm going into markets, I'm buying very well situated properties that frequently are a C+, B- grade asset and reworking them. Fundamentally, I believe there's always a good deal somewhere, right? So to me, it's not necessarily which particular area, Seattle showing the growth that we saw earlier today. It's not about Seattle or nothing. It's not about Las Vegas or nothing. It's about deal specific. Because within each market, there is a need for housing always. And so how can you buy right, make what you're going to make, and sell, rent, or otherwise right? Slightly different perspective.
I'm bullish. I usually am. I feel very good about what's going on. I worry. People say, "What keeps you up at night?" I said, "Well, not a lot. I'm sleep well, but I worry about geopolitical. I think what's going on in the country to the middle and lower class is not right. That's what I worry about. You look back at history; that those outcomes never end well. I don't know why people are so angry in this country. If you're not comfortable, you don't like it, then don't stay. I just that's what I worry about. What I see on the demand side, I'm a big demographics guy. I like what I see there. I feel good about everything other than I worry about the geopolitical. I guess it's baked into the markets right now, but I don't know. That's my concern. I don't like what I've seen with immigration. I don't like how it impacts labor. I don't like how it impacts human beings. So that's what I don't like. Other than that, I'm probably more bullish than I've been the past few years. It feels pretty good. Texas has felt good for some time. The rest of the country, I feel like, has caught up the last couple of years. The Midwest, I think, has great people. I think the Midwest is challenged if you're talking about geographies. I think that particular region's challenged. I think the Northeast is fantastic. It's just not for us. The far Northwest is fantastic. It's not for us. But our markets of the Southeast, Southwest, the Smile, Texas, I feel very good about. And look, there's always opportunities. Ann Arbor, Michigan's probably been the best market we've done business. We've done a lot of work there. It's gone fantastic, and that's the heart of the Midwest. So there's always to your point, there's always opportunities and things to do in any market. And probably the best time to invest is when everyone's down. But I feel very good about it, other than the geopolitical, which I just worry about. I have no answers to it. I just worry about it.
Y'all could join me in a round of applause for this terrific panel. Thank you, guys.